يقدم لكم هذا البرنامج برعاية مجمع مدار.
Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune is on an official state visit to China at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. After extensive talks and a private meeting in Beijing, the leaders of the two countries decided to intensify political consultations at all levels and enhance cooperation in various fields, including the political, economic, cultural, artistic, security, and defense ones. Their aim is to deepen the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two countries. The joint statement emphasized that this partnership will enhance mutual interests and provide support to overcome global challenges and crises. China praised Algeria's significant role in promoting stability, development, and peace in Africa, and Algeria's efforts in peaceful resolution of crises in Libya, Mali, the Sahel region, and Western Sahara, as well as its coordination of the African Union's counter-terrorism and anti-extremism initiatives, were also highly valued, along with its successful experience in countering terrorism. This is All 24 News Special. Hello and welcome to the program. And before we bring in our guest, here is the latest. The Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping oversaw the signing ceremony of 19 agreements and memorandums of understanding covering several areas such as railway, transport and technology transfer center. And to discuss the deep-rooted strategic relations between Algeria and China, we are joined live by Mr. Al-Arabi Sadiqi, Political Science and International Relations Professor at Qatar University. And from Marseille is Mr. Zubair Yahya, expert on Algerian-Chinese relations. And from California is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean, Professor of International Education at California State University. And from Beijing is Ma'am Zhen Shenghui, journalist of CGTN, Chinese National Television. Thank you, gentlemen and ma'am, for joining us. And let me kick it off with you here, Professor Al-Arabi Sadiqi. Strong bilateral relations and decades-long friendship between Algeria and China. What are the aspirations of both countries, and what is their ambition or ambitious goal, according to your reading?
I think we see a kind of paradigm shift, really, as far as the Maghreb is concerned. I'm here in Tunis, and people really are talking kind of in awe. They're in awe of this initiative by the Algerians. Mr. Tebboune was in Russia last month, and he's in China, currently. And this is really almost like an indication of how maybe the Maghreb, should turn east, a bit east, in terms of seeking new development models, new strategic partnerships. And also the key term or the name of the game is to diversify the economy, to diversify the geostrategy, of the region. And I think there will be lots of talk in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Mauritania, about how Algeria is actually opening up new ways. I wouldn't say a third way, but like a new way of how, to approach geostrategy, foreign affairs, international relations. Of course, the content of all of this is of interest, primarily to Algeria. But I think the Maghreb has got lots, to learn, and maybe this will encourage the neighborhood to take a leaf from the book of Algerian foreign policy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. Professor Hamoud Salhi, the reality of Algeria-China relations is governed by historical dimensions and a network of geopolitical and economic calculations. This deepens the strategic alliance. But according to you, how does this contribute to opening vast avenues for cooperation between the two countries?
This visit or the strategic agreements that the Algerian president and his counterpart, the Chinese president, underscore a strong desire on both leadership to strengthen their relationship, and which is known for decades for being built on a solid foundation. The Algerian Chinese have several agreements before. I think with this latest agreement, it adds areas that we've seen previously not or undermined or not that much. There was not that much focus placed on them. For example, in terms of the number of agreements, you have now an additional 19 agreements. That is a relatively an added number, coupled with the other projects that you have going on in Algeria. So it's very, very significant. Another area is agreements around a transfer of knowledge or technology. That is very, very important, particularly when you look at the transfers of technologies. They are really hard to consider. Usually, the Chinese model focuses or is more about transfer of labor, what we call localization of labor, training. The transfer of knowledge, of technology is usually a long-term goal. The third one, and in that same context, the third element is the investment. There has been a sort of a trade or deficit balance, deficit in terms of trade between the Algerians. The Chinese have not spent or invested in Algeria as the Algerians would have liked. But this gives it an incentive. It also established some kind of structure for establishing such an opportunity. As we have seen in Algeria, the new law of investment, you have an environment that is conducive to invest in. So this goes along with that perspective. So you have added value here. And then there are other areas that we should be looking for. Today, there are over or less than 1,500 Algerians working for Chinese companies. This project and the way it's set up could lead to further advance, to further expand in that area. When you take the exchange of knowledge, the training of new educators, Algeria has, or a Chinese university have Chinese companies have 42 agreements with 42 universities, and there are today posted 200 scholarships for Algerians to attend universities in China. So in that perspective, this change of knowledge is very, very important. Add to that you could get, Algerians are open to take a certificate in IT to work for a Chinese company. All of these are areas where this agreement, the 19th and other memorandum of understanding, set the stage for strengthening such a relationship.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Yahya Zubeir, what is the significance of the grand reception? If we just go back a little bit to the reception of the president, including the performance of a piece dedicated to distinguished leaders and the playing of the historic revolutionary anthem, Algeria or Jazairna, during Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboun's first visit to China since assuming office and his meeting with President Xi Jinping.
Well, it's a reflection of the long-standing relationship. For a lot of Algerians, it's unknown that the relationship has started in 1955. The first encounter between China and Algeria was during the Algerian War. The Algerian War had just started, and they met in Bandung in April 1955, and that's where Mr. Zhou Enlai exposed the famous 5 principles of foreign policy of China, which have been espoused by many, and they have remained in place. And this is quite attractive to many countries in Africa and the global South in general. But we should not forget that China was the first non-Arab country to recognize the provisional government of the Algerian Republic in September 1958 and to establish diplomatic relations between the two countries in December 1958. So this was before France established diplomatic relations with China in 1964 or 1965. So the symbol of that, I mean, it symbolizes that relationship of the revolutionaries. Many are not aware that Mao Zedong met with the FLN, the wartime FLN, with many members, including at some point the president of the GPRA. And China had helped the Algerian revolutionaries, had helped with the training of mujahideen and so on and so forth. So I think that reception symbolizes the bonds that were, established in the 1950s and continued because China came to the rescue of Algeria in 1963 when Algeria did not have any doctors. I mean, there were a couple of hundred doctors throughout the whole country, and China sent the first mission, the first medical mission overseas, which is now at its 27th badge in Algeria. So I think this was important for the Chinese to reassert that kind of deep friendship and deep commitment to Algeria, and vice versa, by the way. So I think it sends an important symbol, especially, as I said, China has helped Algeria more than anyone knows.
Indeed.
In the generations, Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, told the Algerian delegation once, how many soldiers do you want to arm? We can give you up to 200,000 soldiers, to arm them and to help you, and also the training in guerrilla, tactics and so on and so forth. So I think that is part of the recognition or the symbol. It's really to re-emphasize the historical memory.
Very insightful reading indeed. Thank you so much. Let me just include Ms. Shang Hui. What are the diplomatic implications of the extensive discussions between the Algerian and Chinese presidents, which revealed a convergence of visions and interests on various regional and economic topics?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me today on this very special occasion. So talking about the relations between China and Algeria, we can see there's a lot of things that is going to come with this presidential visit to China. And if we look back a little bit, we can see that already the two countries has already played a very important role and very important cooperations in the Belt and Road Initiative and also other important cooperation documents. And also especially in the domain of infrastructure, in petrochemical and mineral, also in agricultural issues, and also in high tech in the future. For example, all of the cooperations that has already part implemented between the two countries in the aerospace, in nuclear energy, in information, and also in telecommunications, and also in renewable energy. That could be also very interesting to very hot topic this time during the presidential visit here in China. And also, certainly everything included in this Belt and Road Initiative. And so we can see that in this period, especially during these past years between the two countries, the trade and investment and economy has boosted a lot. For example, the bilateral trade mounted to 7.4 billion in 2022, of which imports from Algeria stood at 1.1 billion US dollars, and on a year-to-year increase of 5.8%. And Algeria is also one of the Chinese largest contracting market overseas. So it's to illustrate to which point it is very important to another time actually to say that the cooperations between the two countries covers a lot of different kind of domain, especially energy-related products, infrastructure, and also different kind of cooperations in new energy that's going to come in the future.
Indeed. And Professor Larbi Sadiki, what are the potential implications and benefits, let's say, of the mutual reinforcement of political and security cooperation between Algeria and China, as stated in the joint statement after the leaders' talks in solidifying the upward trajectory of their bilateral relations?
I think what I see is that there is a reconstructionist element, if I may say, in terms of new identity making, in terms of the type of leadership that's going to assume and position itself for leadership globally. Both countries actually have got like lots of similarities. Algeria is known, for its vastness. So is China. Both are leaders in their regions and also aspiring leaders, globally. And of course, Algeria has got also a historical pedigree, as is China. China has got also that historical pedigree in terms of wanting, to lead and maybe influencing and impacting on international affairs. I think this bodes well for both countries, of course, like with the caveat also that I could see in terms of how we read this in terms of IR, that both countries are actually perfect realists in terms, of their subscription to a strong centralized government, which you find, in Algeria and in China. Both also happen to be liberalizers, despite the fact that they have got some kind of socialist ideology that frames and shapes and informs the brand of politics deployed in both countries. And also both, I guess, really from a quasi-Marxist reading, subscribe, to let's say, a commitment of changing the world, and not only via soft power, because really the strategic partnership that is unfolding and unfurling, between the two countries has got lots of, let's say, soft elements, but also Algeria is interested in hard power as well, as is China. It's like, the backup, for this new geostrategy, for the type of political economy that both countries, seem to be pursuing. So it's really interesting for me. It makes a fantastic thesis for a PhD student to write about how this agreement is drenched in interesting IR.
And how do you see the comprehensive strategic partnership with China to support the economic and social development within Algeria, making Algeria the first Arab country to forge such a partnership, Mr. Larbi?
Yes, indeed. I think really Algeria is, as I said, is reclaiming the mantle of leadership that it had. Algeria is now, for Bouteflika, for lots really of the grandees of Arab foreign policy, because what has happened over the past 30 years is a kind of decentering of North Africa in terms of playing their part in international affairs, especially Algeria, more so than Morocco and Tunisia. And I think really the Algerians now are really giving actually the Emiratis and the Qataris and the Saudis run for their money. Algeria is really reclaiming that old role. And as a Maghrebi, I actually really welcome this. We want really Algeria. Actually, we want to see more of Algeria. Of course, we want to see more of all of the Arab world. Actually diversifying and maybe looking a bit east. That doesn't really mean actually abandoning whatever coalitions and alliances they have and relationships. But I think China is important, Russia is important, and really the irony of all of this really is happening at a time when Tunisia has just signed, some kind of agreement with the EU, and I think the EU is really aware, of all of these, let's say, IR machinations and changes. And I see that they're really concerned. I'm pretty sure what Algeria is doing now is actually to talk, of the EU and I guess really the wider world.
And speaking of the importance of such countries such as China and Russia, Professor Larbi Sadiqi, I ask you again, how significant do you find China's support for Algeria in its desire to join the BRICS, for instance?
I think it's really brilliant. I think Algeria is well equipped, in terms of, let's say, the hydrocarbon economy, the GDP, which is I think doubling in 2023. The projection is close to or more than 500 billion. And I think really Algeria, which is really not talked about, maybe our colleagues, Yahya Zubair and our esteemed friend, from America can talk a bit, to this point, that it's got actually an incredible expatriate of technocrats and engineers and so on, which really are going to be actually the next generation, that can catapult Algeria into playing a bigger role, in artificial intelligence and robotic industrialization, drones, etc., etc. So I think really Algeria going into BRICS is actually going, to be maybe creating some kind of domino effect at a time when Arab countries, and I hope they do the same, they take a leaf from the Algerian book, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Qatar eventually. I think BRICS is a good thing for Algeria, and Algeria deserves to be part of this mega alliance that's got a huge future. And I think the Russians and the Chinese, the South Africans, Brazilians are receptive, of Algeria. I think Algeria is really a great country. It's like a shining model out there, and I wish them success.
Thank you, Mr. Larbi Sadiqi. And Professor Hamoud Salhi, how significant is the 65th anniversary milestone of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Algeria and China, considering the timing of Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboun's visit to China and the notable celebrations?
It's for obvious reason. There is a huge historical significance. It fits into this whole idea of China's friendship is real. It's needed when you need the most. The same thing how the Algerians feel about how the Chinese feel about the Algerians. I think it's very, very significant on many levels. And when you look at, for example, the structure of on the international system these days, we are about seeing a new world order. Algeria is said to be a non-permanent member in the Security Council. So that sets a stage for the Algeria and China to work through several on several issues in the international arena. Algeria could use the parliamentary rules in the Security Council to co-lead initiatives with China and present it as its own. So you have that aspect where it could be very beneficial, and its significance that today it's 65 years for that. When you look at also the other aspect of it, Al-Arabi and Yahya spoke about this whole huge long tradition of cooperation, admiration, and seeing this relationship as with a strong potential to grow. We are about to see also a change in the international order. The Chinese, for example, and Algerians is set common understanding and have common principle of how the international order should be. The Chinese supported Algeria in 1976 when it called for a new international economic order. That Chinese perception is manifested today in many positions, pushing for a more egalitarian system of economic trade relations. It's also manifested when you look at the new world, for example, in post-Ukraine, we're most likely to see more economic blocks. BRICS is one of them, but this requires that the Chinese and the Algerians perhaps use this opportunity to gain, to have an impact on this international system. For the Algerian, I see this as a very, very very strong opportunity, an opportunity that the Algerians should take seriously. Algeria's China relationship, you could start. It started around 2000 when Huawei established the first factory in Algeria, the first their factory in Africa, built in Algeria. But there was some hard struggle. The experience, the factory that Huawei established or built in Algeria didn't go, went closed after years. But the Algerian model is also known for adapting to the climate. They work with the local population. So this is an opportunity for the Algerians to use it and to raise to their potential to develop what Dr. Larbi was saying, being a leader in the artificial intelligence, for example, or robotic. And we all know how successful and how brilliant are Algerians in that area. So there is a huge potential for Algeria to move, to seize an opportunity and do well. And certainly the Chinese, on the other hand, understood the Algerian market. When you look at this past 20 years, there is adaptation of the Algerian model to the Algerians. It is up to the Algerian now to understand what the Chinese want, how the Chinese behave and act, and use that to benefit their model. The fact that you have 42 universities having exchange agreements with Chinese companies is a strong indication and a step in the right side. So in more words, you have a commitment from the leadership, you have a commitment from companies, the private sector, you have a strong dedication of the Chinese to push forward this relationship. I think now it's up to the Algerians to do more what is expected, to rise to the expectation. President Tebboune talked about a very, very serious issue in Russia when he talked about the administrative problems or challenges that face Algeria, and he comforted the Russian that those problems will addressed. Algeria has a new investment law. It's been praised. It's been supported. President Tebboune mentioned of the challenge, of the bureaucratic challenge, of the administrative, could also very much apply here. The failure of the early businesses was due in part to administrative problems, to problems that are within Algeria. So I think this new environment where we are is conducive to developing a stronger national economy and an economy that will include increase in the Algerian labor in the market. We're talking about 1,300 to 1,500 only individual working for the Chinese company. This huge program should lead to more Algerians working in these companies.
I know you talked out right there. Since you've been mentioning economy, I just wanted to hark back to China's support being an essential asset for Algeria's entry into the BRICS. And you spoke about the investment law reforms that Algeria is carrying. How do you think this support by China into joining the BRICS will impact the economic relations between the two countries?
It's a huge... and you should know that all members of the BRICS have supported Algeria. The challenge for Algeria is meeting the economic requirement, and those, judging by what we're seeing, they could be adopted. So it is a political decision, but it's also an economic decision. And the fact that you have this kind of decision, this kind of a relationship, how China sees the Algerian is very, very important. China worked, or the Afro, and Dr. Zubair could expand on this more. The Chinese African group originated by an Algerian idea, and it led to what it is today. The first country that the Chinese thought of in Africa was Algeria, and through Algeria that they see themselves developing their strategic objective. So this kind of relationship, the value that the Chinese place in Algeria, and so other countries, we're talking about South Africa, we're talking about Brazil and Russia, all these have a strong sort of views of Algeria, in favor of Algeria. So I see it as a big support that would strengthen the BRICS and strengthen Algeria membership in this organization.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Yahya Zubair, the agreement emphasized mutual support for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. What does this signify according to you?
This is not new. This goes back to 1954, when China stated the 5 principles of foreign policy. And so, and one of the attractive aspects of these principles is that there is mutual respect, non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs, respect for territorial integrity, and so on. And of course, for the Chinese, the main point is the territorial integrity related to Taiwan, and Algeria is has a strong position in recognizing the one China policy, like many countries around the world who recognize that. And so that's another point, in a sense, it has been reasserted. So there are many other issues beyond that, just that point. You go into such notions as multilateralism, and so on. The fight against hegemony, multipolarity that should be instituted. So these are aspects that have been around, but they have been reasserted, confirmed, and these are some of the points upon which both Algeria and China agree. There is a similarity. My dear friend Hamoud was talking about a paper I just did. I talked about Algeria and China having almost similar foreign policies. The principles of their foreign policies correspond. They overlap in many ways. So this reassertion of the principles, they have other consequences about the politicization of human rights, for instance, the Uyghur question, or Tibet, and so on and so forth. So that statement puts an end, or at least communicates the fact that both countries stand for those principles.
So let me just include Ms. Sheng Hui, just to see her perspective on this. Sheng Hui, Algeria and China, just as Mr. Yahya Zubair was saying, have remained for a long time committed to principles of mutual respect and mutual benefit for decades, unaffected by political shifts worldwide. What is your comment on this?
Exactly. It is interesting actually to note that no matter what happens in the international society, the relations, the bonds between China and Algeria has always been very strong. And also, this year marks also the 65th anniversary since China and Algeria has established its diplomatic ties. And also the 60th anniversary since China's dispatch of its first medical team to Algeria. So we can see that there's a very strong bond in historically speaking between the two countries, and also internationally speaking. In 1971, Algeria played an important role in helping China to gain a seat at both the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council. What marks me actually the most is the shared value that China and Algeria have for both countries. For example, I would want to share my experience, my professional experience when I went on an interview. It was last month for an event called the Night of Algeria in Beijing, and which is actually a literary fair in promoting Algerian culture, in promoting Algerian literature here in China. And this is actually an event that is organized unparalleled to Beijing International Book Fair. So at this time and this period, actually, I met with some Algerian writers and also some Algerian film directors. And at this period, it is important actually to find out that China and the Algerian people, we shared the same kind of value. As the novelist Wassini Larege, who was actually there attending this event, said that the world is changing and the US cannot ride alone. There are also many other cultures together. There are also many other civilizations. And also I've also, in this occasion, interviewed the ambassador of Algeria in China, Mr. Hassan Hapai. So he said that he wanted to promote the Algerian cinema, calligraphy, culture, books. And so to make the Algerian culture known here in China, because why, from my understanding, is that China, in Chinese world and also Arabic world, we all both talking about the harmony. We all both talking about the cultural things, and also we all talking about the history, because we all shared a very long civilizations with our two countries, and also two civilizations, the Arabic one and the Chinese one. So this is important actually. How do we define the harmony? We can have different religions in harmony, we can have different opinions in harmony, we can have different civilizations in harmony, which is different to the zero-sum game advocated by some Western countries. So in this case, I would say that there is a kind of shared value, a shared also a cultural background between the Chinese world and also the Arabic world, between China and Algeria. And it is also interesting to note that this time in the memorandum signed during the presidential visit here in China, there is an initiative that was actually put forward, which is called the Global Civilization Initiative. So this is an initiative that is calling about the global civilization, calling about the cultural cooperation, media cooperation, more books to come, more civilization and exchanges between Chinese students and Algerian students, Chinese young people and Algerian young people. And this time, what interests him the most is the curiosity and also this interest that Chinese students who actually were there attending this event, attended this Algeria night, this event promoting Algeria culture and Algeria books, and also Algeria's plays and theaters. At this period, you can see that how Chinese students are attracted by Algerian poems, by Algerian literature. These are, students from Arabic studies and also French-speaking studies. But they are really interested in the intonations in Arabic culture, in the intonations and the culture in Algerian poems. So I find it really interesting to see to which points, like, there are many Chinese students now got interested in Algerian civilization. And also, during the book fair in Beijing during it was the past month, we can see the pavilion. The only pavilion, Algerian pavilion, was the biggest one because also Algeria was also the guest at this book fair. And we can see that many Chinese children went there to see there's the Algerian costumes, Algerian dresses, Algerian books, Algerian different kind of books in Arabic,
Very
in
interested
French,
indeed,
in English.
Ms. Shanghui. Just to deviate a little bit from the interest in both cultures, I would like to include Mr. Yahya Zubair again, just to ask you about what some analysts are saying. Well, it's quite obvious that Africa is gradually becoming a stage for international competition, and China's interest and presence are growing on the continent. Meanwhile, Algeria, on the other hand, seeks African leadership as well. How will both countries, according to you, benefit from each other in this approach?
Well, historically, Algeria has been instrumental in helping China make inroads into Africa. But it was helped after 1989 with the sanctions that had been imposed by the West on China, and the Algerians were, at that time, Algeria was very influential on the African continent and within the Organization of African Unity. And the Algerians had encouraged the Africans to stand by China. And China was in its period of modernization and needed Africa. When the West had neglected Africa, seeing it only as a continent of diseases and misery and poverty and so on and so forth, whereas China understood already that not only does Africa boast a lot of minerals and other items that are necessary for its modernization, but it came with a new philosophy of development. In other words, China positioned itself as a South-South collaborator, as a developing country, and it was not imposing its own ways on others. In other words, here I am, China, this is how I'm making it, I'm being successful, still developing, but you're free to emulate what I'm doing or not emulate, but I'm not going to impose anything on you. And by 2000, China and African countries came together to the setting up of a multilateral forum, which is the FOCAC, the Forum on Africa-China Cooperation, FOCAC. And of course, there was another one with the Arab states, which is known as the China-Arab States Cooperation Forum. So, but basically, the message that China had brought to Africa was, development. In other words, let's talk about eradication, just like it's happening in China, which has been very successful in eradicating poverty. But that was the message taken to the Africans. And this South-South collaboration or cooperation was proven in a tangible way during the COVID-19 crisis. The pandemic, how China came to the rescue was helping not only the African countries, but basically 150 countries. This is what I identified, 150 countries, but most of which are from the global south, and then the development or the production of vaccines, and China had promised that it would distribute the vaccines as soon as they were discovered, and so on and so forth. And trade between Africa and China, and trade and investments have expanded exponentially, just like with Algeria. Algeria, by the way, in the 1980s, trade between Algeria and China was less than 200 million per year. In 1992, it reached about 200 million. Now it's, like Zhang Hui said earlier, now it reached at some point 9 billion. And by the way, the potential is still there. It could be much higher. There are many areas in which they could cooperate. But Africa is important, and Africa is China wants to be wants to be a spokesperson, if you wish, for Africa, for African needs, and so on. So Africa is important. It's not just as a supplier of minerals, and this is why there is.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yahya Zubair. Very clear indeed. Let me just give the final word here to Dr. or Professor Hamoud Salhi. In light of what Yahya Zubair and Ms. Zhang Hui were saying, the comprehensive strategic partnership between Africa and China is of great importance. How will it assist African nations in achieving their shared development goals in line with Agenda 2063?
A lot. I mean, it's a big boost to Africa. And let's sort of put this in a perspective, just for comparative reasons. Emmanuel Macron visited Africa back, I think, in 2022, and his goal or his advice to the African leaders, you need to get out of the China, and you're using a terrible model. This is not new. The British did it in 2015, in 2014. They were also going to Africa and telling Africans the Chinese products are terrible. But let's put this into a perspective and look at the European Union Maghrebi relations. After 20 years or so, we are still talking about really a meager contribution of establishing a free market. The whole conversation in the EU and what has been achieved heavily emphasize security and security from terrorism. Shift to the Chinese model and how the Chinese answer or address the issue of terrorism. As some scholars pointed out, to the Chinese, terrorism presents an opportunity for socioeconomic development. Translate that to how the Chinese, when they deal with the African countries, they deal with them on an equal basis. They provide funding. As we have said, the Chinese model focuses also on training, localization of labor, and providing shared knowledge, particularly in the area of technology. These are essential elements that gets these countries, the African countries, to pursue an economic development free of debts from the IMF, as we all know, which really cripple the countries. That like you enter in a cycle of development or the deepening of interdevelopment. That's a serious business. So what you have with the Chinese model and where the African countries contribute to the development of Africa is the creation of an independent economy, an economy that serves the needs of the population without adding or without creating mechanism of dependence that hinder the progress of the country.
Thank you so much, Professor Hamoud Salhi, and thank you all, my panel of guests, for these insights, and thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on our channel. We reach the end. Join us again tomorrow for more updates and analysis. Take care.
Thank you.
قدم لكم هذا البرنامج برعاية مجمع مدار.